Hello and welcome back to the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how you can get your device to market, what you need to do, the things you need to think about, and how you can make sure you're not letting cybersecurity slow you down. I'm your co-host Trevor Slattery, and I'm joined by our co-host Christian Espinosa. We also have a very special guest today, Suzy Engwall. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. Again, I'm Suzy Engwall. I have a small consulting company called HealthTech Strategies. I've been in healthcare for about 20 years now. I actually started in lean transformation inside of a hospital, which I did for about 10 years. And it was fantastic trying to make change in healthcare, but it was really hard to do with no money, no technology, no staff, and no time. So I made my way over to the innovation side so that we could truly make some change about 10 years ago and never looked back. So I've done everything from setting up innovation programs at hospitals to teaching human-centered design to clinicians and physicians, to mentoring and advising startups, to working with investors and everything kind of in between. So I love this space. I'm very passionate about it. I have a little bit of an extra passion for pediatrics and women's health. But I'm happy to be here today. I think this topic is really interesting. I don't claim to know everything about cybersecurity, which is why I'm thankful for people like you. But I'm happy to be here today and to talk about this with you guys.
Awesome. And you're coming to us from California, is that right?
Yep. Southern California.
SoCal. I was born in Riverside, which is part of SoCal. Trevor's moving to California. It's kind of like, is it Central or Northern California? San Francisco Bay Area. That's kind of northern.
Northern.
Yeah. Signed a lease as of Sunday. So,
oh, wow. That's huge.
Yeah, super excited.
That is huge. That's an expensive area.
Yeah, it's coming from Arizona, though, which is getting more expensive because everyone from California is taking over Arizona.
Of course.
But, you don't have all the weather problems. In Arizona, it's either 120 degrees or -5, and there doesn't really seem to be any in between. So,
well, in Phoenix, it's always warm. Yeah.
Phoenix, it's always warm. And
you'll love San Francisco. The climate is fantastic, although you might get a little bit more rain than you're used to.
Yeah. And pretty big medtech scene. It seems that I was already out there enough for conferences or events or this, that, or the other thing. So save myself a flight once in a while.
Yeah, love it, love it. I really like it up there. I think I'm in Orange County, so I'm SoCal, but it is a huge medtech scene, and there's always something to do every single night. If you want to go to any kind of an investor event, you'll find one free around every corner. So it's fantastic. It's a fantastic place to live in this industry for sure.
That's awesome. Isn't there like a SoCal, NoCal rivalry that goes on in California?
You know what? I kind of feel like there is. It's weird though, because when I talk to people from Northern California, I don't necessarily feel it, but I do think there's a little bit of that. Like I think there's a little bit of NorCal envy down here in SoCal. We have a great ecosystem, but we know that the ecosystem here doesn't get together as much, isn't probably as big, especially with the investor pool, as maybe Northern California is. So I think I have to say, I have a little bit of envy. A lot of times I have friends that are posting about all the fun medtech events they're going to and the investor events they're going to. And I'm like, darn it, it's a short flight, but I can't make it up there tonight. So there's a lot of things that I feel like I miss out on by not being up in the Northern California region. So for me, it's more of an envy than anything.
You guys get way better weather though. So at least you have that.
That is true. Our weather is fantastic.
It's always the same, isn't it? It's like 75 and sunny.
Yeah. San Diego, I have to argue, has the best. And they have a really, really good ecosystem in San Diego too. And you'd think it's not that far away, but going anywhere in California, it takes you forever to get there. If it's a 15-mile drive, you got to times that by 3, and that's how long it's going to take you to get there.
Awesome. So I know you work with Suzy with startups and kind of help them with a roadmap. What are some of the biggest challenges that startups face from your perspective?
I think it's everything. It starts with funding, really, right? How do we get funding for our project? How do we get funding for what we're moving forward in? But even things from go-to-market strategy, regulatory reimbursement, especially people that are coming in new to the market and trying to understand what are all the pieces of the puzzle that I need to put together and how do I put them together? And I think cybersecurity, since this is kind of our topic today a little bit, is one that I don't think that startups think about as much as they should. And it is a challenge because it's something that for certain products, you're going to have it for FDA approval and things like that. But unless there's compliance around it, sometimes it can be a bit daunting or maybe it gets completely overlooked. There are definitely multiple challenges in this space. And it all kind of starts from idea stage on. So happy to talk about any one of those topics. There's no shortage for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talked to a lot of investors, and one of the investors that I talked to said out of his portfolio, 7% of companies succeed. So 93% fail in medtech. Why do you think the 93% fail? It's a pretty high number. I know like in business in general, startups fail, but that's a pretty high number.
It is. And I think a lot of it comes down to how hard it is to get a product adopted in healthcare. Market adoption is challenging. Buying cycle times are very lengthy. So even once you are able to kind of get into the hospital, sometimes it can take some time. I often see people that have issues where maybe they have like a great physician champion who's really kind of working the system to get them in. And then it's been 6 months and they're waiting and it's close. And then that physician leaves and goes somewhere else. And all of a sudden everything just gets dropped and you kind of have to start over. So there's instances like that happen. Sometimes I think it's a lack of product market fit. I mean, most of the time it's a lack of product market fit, right? Not understanding where your product should really be placed within the ecosystem and not
Isn't
really.
that step one though? Like knowing
It
you can
is.
develop a product, knowing who's going to consume it, how people are going to pay for it. Isn't it like kind of like step one?
It is. But even when you think like, hey, I have a great product. So I'll kind of give an example here. Like sometimes you can have the best thing since sliced bread that's really going to help a patient out. The physicians like it, the patients like it. But then it does something like either like call out a certain segment of caregivers. Like maybe it's somehow accidentally showcasing what nurses aren't doing right. And then you get pushback from the nursing population. Or maybe it's going to interfere with a physician. Like I actually have had a physician say out loud about a product. I will not say who, because I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. This product is great, but it's going to cost me billable visits. So I probably won't adopt it. And I love the level of honesty, but it also is a sad thing to hear. There's a lot of nuances. So even when you feel like you might have product market fit, you may not, because there might be those little nuances that you maybe didn't think about early on.
That's interesting. I didn't think about the nuances, but you're saying like the nurses might, if a product highlights something they're not doing as great as they should, they're going to push back. So the product, even though it's solving a massive problem, is not going to get adopted because of basically politics.
Yes. Yeah. So there are all kinds of internal politics. I actually had marketing shoot down a product that we were going to work on for a company, for a hospital many years ago. We had an idea that a clinician had come up with that they wanted to integrate into a hospital. And we were kind of working with them to co-develop something. And we got the green light from everybody. And then we said, oh, let's do some PR around this. Let's get marketing involved. And marketing came in, and somebody in there didn't like it and ended up shutting the whole thing down. So luckily we were still at the early stages. We weren't ready for market adoption yet. We were just actually going to create something. But you never know who within a hospital or who within politics can kind of get in the way of these things moving forward. And so that's the challenging part. And I see it every day. I've got a product right now that a physician wants in a hospital, and it got shut down to the value analysis committee. So there are these things called value analysis that look at different products that are coming in. And so we're trying to figure out, why did value analysis not like it when it's passed value analysis with multiple other hospitals? So there's a lot of different places within an organization that market adoption can break down. And so it's increasingly challenging to get a product in, and physician preference is not what it used to be. 20 years ago, if a physician said, I want this product, you had a high probability of getting it in, or a higher probability of getting it in. And it's just not the same today.
I wonder why I understand all the politics, and like these hospitals are owned by they're like owned by somebody else that owns like 50,000 or 50 hospitals, like in conglomeration. So I guess there's a lot of politics, more than I thought about now we're talking about it. And then from a cybersecurity perspective, even though a product may pass the FDA in the United States or EU MDR, the hospitals are starting to raise the bar.
Yes.
That says you can't bring your product to our hospital unless you've proven it's actually secure. And we don't really, sometimes they don't think the FDA is scrutinizing the device enough. So they want more requirements on that device from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's a valid argument. I think they have to they have to scrutinize it. They have to. You're talking about people's lives that are at stake, right? So if it was my hospital, I would want to make sure that you're kind of checking off all of those boxes. And then, you've got to think about, there's a lot of nuances just within cybersecurity as well, and things that people maybe don't consider and think about. And I know on one of your previous podcasts, you guys talked a lot about data is one thing, but actually, what if somebody hacks into a device? I know you guys did an article before on the whole Homeland story about somebody hacking into a pacemaker and whether or not that would really be something that could happen. It absolutely can happen. And so I think hospitals have to worry about these things. They've got to worry about whether it's a device or even just a digital health app. They've got to worry about not only securing the patient's data, but also, could this device or could this app be messed with in a way that could harm the patient or, maybe even cause them death.
One thing we've seen come up as an even further increased challenge for some of these manufacturers is a manufacturer of an old device, and by old, pretty much anything before September 2023 when all these cyber rules became enforced, will try to go and sell their device into Mayo Clinic, for an example. And if you're working with the current FDA guidelines, you should have a pretty good baseline for security. You might need a few extra things. But before that, it was sort of the Wild West. Nobody had anything for cybersecurity in their devices. So now when they're trying to sell fairly recent devices, only 2-year-old devices into Mayo Clinic, they say, you need all these cybersecurity requirements. All these hospitals have the same requirements. And then the manufacturer goes, oh, our device is physically incapable of this. We're going to have to go back and redesign it. And that, under the regulatory lens, that's been a very hard topic to navigate, how we're handling legacy devices. But I think the hospitals are finding a way to work it out themselves by just not allowing anything that doesn't meet those standards.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think that it's one of those things that we all have to be cognizant of because, you're talking about devices that aren't that old, but things are changing fast, especially with AI. Things are changing fast. And I don't know how we're going to keep up with it. I think, we're already a little bit behind. And so in another 2 years from now, maybe something that passes the bar today may not pass tomorrow. So how do you stay on top of all of these things that are changing? And I don't pretend to have the answer to that, but I think it's something that we really have to think about when we're creating some type of new device in healthcare for sure.
It's a never-ending cat and mouse game in cybersecurity. And I think it'll remain that way for pretty much forever.
Yeah.
Who's the cat and who's the mouse?
That's a good question.
I think the mouse would be the bad guys. The cat would be the good guys. That's the way I think of it.
I think it's the opposite. Is it like the cat always trying to catch the mouse?
That is true.
Yeah, the good guys are trying to catch the bad guys. The cat's, wait. I said the cat's the good guys the first time, right?
Yes.
I don't know if I go back to the old Tom and Jerry cartoons. I'm really dating myself. I think the mouse was actually the good guy. I don't know.
Yeah, the mouse was the good guy. Well,
that's
I guess
typically
that brings
how
up,
it is, I think, yes. The mouse is a good guy, and we're trying to defend our position from the cat.
And using a cartoon, irrelevant cartoon is really the best way to defend any position, right?
But if the cat is the bad guy, the cat's always going to win because, like I said in the previous episodes, we have 1,000 doors we have to make sure are locked and shut and secure. And if one of those is left open, the bad guy or the cat can get through.
Yeah.
And it's almost an impossible scenario to make sure everything is locked and secured from a cybersecurity lens.
Yeah. I think if somebody wants to get through bad enough, they're going to do everything they can to find a way. And that's the challenge. It's how do you combat that, right? Because you can't get into the brains of everyone around you and how they're going to try and get through. So you just have to, do the best you can to think of every possible scenario.
And that's what my team does at Blue Goat. We're ethical hackers. We try to break into the device every possible way and then work with the manufacturer to secure it.
I love it.
But the thing we talked about earlier is these legacy devices or devices that got through before, they're totally unsecure in my perspective.
Yeah. And you're probably right about that. And that's going to be a challenge going forward, like we talked about. I know that hospitals are scrutinizing these things more and more. And I don't know how fast those rules are going to change, but it's going to be really interesting to see how the adoption of AI, how quickly it's adopted into hospitals, because I don't know. I don't even know if every hospital has the right team to even understand all the implications around it. Some probably do, but I don't know if all of them do. So I think when we bring AI into the mix and we think about how it's going to impact everything from devices to apps to, other types of software, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us in this space.
Yeah, and it's an interesting problem and an interesting solution, the AI, because Trevor and I have talked about how to train an AI model. And one of the things that we've mentioned is if you feed the model 1 million images of a cancerous tumor and 10,000 of a benign tumor, as example, then the AI is going to be predisposed to say, to diagnose cancer. But then if you're the physician and you're using the AI model, who's actually liable or responsible for that diagnosis? Is it the model or is it the physician? Because Trevor was talking about one episode here in Phoenix, we have Waymos, which are autonomous driving cars. And apparently a Waymo cannot get a ticket because there's no person driving it. So it kind of goes back to the AI, who is actually accountable for the decisions made?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, when I talk to people who are creating new devices or new technologies in healthcare and that are using AI, I think one of the things that, right now they're calling it clinical decision support instead of diagnoses, and diagnoses has a higher standard of approval. But I feel like that's how they kind of get away with not having that liability, right? Where clinical decision support tool, it's up to the physician to make that final call. When you get into that realm of we're diagnosing things, then I don't really know where the liability lies. It probably lies with both of them. But it's really hard to understand what those implications are. And I think we'll have more clarity around them, a few years from now. But what we don't want is to not have clarity. And then we have patients dying or having, bad outcomes. So it's kind of that whole, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But it's definitely a huge concern right now.
I think there needs to be just shared liability all over. The manufacturers are creating a product. They should be designing it securely,
Does shared
safely,
liability ever work though? That means there's shared accountability, which never works.
What is the ratio of liability? I think would be the hardest question to answer. But, the person making the decision, the doctor, the surgeon, whoever, should know what risks and what false positives can come up from the product. The manufacturers should be designing it as effectively as possible to try to take away this risk. And the hospitals need to be verifying that they're actually bringing a good product into their ecosystem. So everyone should have some liability, and all of them need to be disclosing what are the potential risks to the patient so that they're informed about what risk they're taking on. And then there's a matter of shared liability with everyone involved in the system. But does the hospital take 50% or 10% or 20% of it? I'm not really sure what the balance is there.
Well, if I'm the patient and I have a bad outcome due to a mistake that was made, I'm suing the hospital, right? Chances are I may not even know. And this is actually a good question for you guys. Do you think that patients should know if a physician is using AI to help them diagnose a patient or to help them treat a patient? Is that even being disclosed to patients? That they're saying, I might use ChatGPT to help me with some work that I'm doing for a client, but then I'm taking that work and I'm making it my own. I'm using it as an aid. I'm not having it do the work for me. Do I need to disclose that to my clients? Should physicians be disclosing this to the patients? And I don't know. I'm just guessing. If I'm a patient and I have a bad outcome and there's going to be a lawsuit filed, I'm suing the hospital. And then the hospital's going to have to deal with it. Am I able to sue this AI company? Am I able to sue this manufacturer?
Yeah, I think from a security perspective, I feel like someone should know if there's AI involved since it's changing what threats may be available. The good news is I think the manufacturer's marketing team is going to make sure that everyone knows there's AI in the device, so we don't have to worry too much about that. But It is an interesting question. How much should the patient know about what is happening in the device? On the security side of things, when we're preparing labeling documentation, which is going to go to the operator, to the user, to the patient, whoever, there's a lot of information that we're providing about any potential risks, what the device architecture looks like, all of this information, which should be made available to everyone throughout the process. We even prepare a list of all the components used in the device to make sure that none of them are insecure. So we're disclosing a lot of risk, and inadvertently, we would be disclosing whether or not there's AI in the product through that means. But directly stating it to the patient isn't something that really comes up from the security lens. It comes up from what risk is introduced by that AI, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. But, I think the challenge is like, let's take the radiology, for example. If a doctor tells me I have a cancerous tumor, I want to know, did the doctor make that decision or did some app somewhere make that decision? And do I want somebody to take a second look at it? So I think, those are the kinds of questions when you're thinking about liability that you've got to kind of think about as far as what you're disclosing to your patient population. I would probably want to know. I don't know that it would change my mind about things. I might actually feel better about it. Like, wow, that they used it. But what I would want to know is, maybe AI diagnosed me, but a doctor verified it, right?
Do you think most patients actually care? Because from my experience with a decent population, most people the doctor said something, they just take it as like gospel. They don't even want to get a second opinion half the time.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing is that, for me, I would want to know, I would care, but I think that a lot of times there's this feeling of, I don't want to bother my doctor, whatever my doctor knows everything. They're smarter than I am. I'm going to take what they say as gospel. And, doctors are human. They make mistakes, right? Just and a lot of these a lot of these algorithms were built by humans. We all know that like ChatGPT sometimes hallucinates, things like that. So, I think mistakes are going to be made, and it's just really, I guess, maybe how much do people want to know about that? I personally would want to know, but I think you're right. Maybe the majority of patients don't. Maybe for them, it's the doctor says this, they know what they're talking about. I'm going to take it as gospel.
Well, I personally want to know as well. And a couple years ago, I was diagnosed where I had 6 blood clots, and the doctor saw me for like 10 minutes and told me I had to take blood thinners the rest of my life. And I took agency over my own life because nobody could tell me why I got the blood clots. I personally think it was a COVID vaccine reason, but I decided not to take blood thinners and reclaim my health. But I think most people would probably just listen to that diagnosis after 10 minutes, AI or not involved. It's like,
yes,
here's a diagnosis. And I think we need to, society needs to evolve a little bit to take agency over their own health and think, okay, we've got AI, we have a physician, we have all these things, but ultimately, it's my life and my decision about what I would decide to do, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that's very true. And even for myself, like when I go to my doctor, I pretty much take their word for what they're saying. Unless something just doesn't absolutely feel right to me, I'm going to believe what they're saying and believe what they're telling me. And, that's the hard part is, how do we make sure that people are educated in understanding that they have options, understanding that they can get second opinions if they need to. But a lot of people don't even know how to navigate their insurance to do things like that. So it snowballs into a whole other challenge, right? I know we're getting far away from the cybersecurity topic.
Oh, it's okay. It's an interesting topic because I wonder if people will actually listen to AI or a machine more than a human. That's kind of like what we're talking about here.
I think they would. And unfortunately, you kind of brought up COVID and I think there's a little bit of distrust now going on. That maybe the whole COVID pandemic made worse with people maybe not trusting everything their doctors say, or maybe people not trusting everything the pharmaceutical companies are telling us. And so that may or may not be a good thing. Maybe it was going to help people take more agency over their care, which I think is a good thing. I think that's what we all should be doing, like you did. But it also could lead to other challenges where, maybe we're not taking care of our health because we're not believing in our doctors when they're right.
Yeah, and we were talking about disclosing cybersecurity risk earlier. I think one of the challenges is because Trevor and I have talked about this on previous episodes. Like you mentioned the Homeland episode and Dick Cheney's defibrillator. which was the wireless capability is disabled. But if I am a patient and I have a implantable, like a defibrillator, and there are cybersecurity risk involved with it, do I actually like look at those risks and decide I want this implantable, or like how do I, analyze that and what do I decide? Because that's kind of where we're evolving to. Even if I have a surgery and I have an autonomous surgical robot performing surgery and there's a risk associated with that robot, do I decide to have a autonomous robot perform the surgery, or do I decide to have, a physician manually do it? Like how do people like make these decisions today, given the labeling of the risk?
Yeah. And, I hate to say it, but I think the majority of people don't. Like, they're going to do exactly what we talked about. They're going to trust what their physician said. The physician says, I need this surgery. They said robotic is the way to go. And I don't know that they're going to ask about unless you're highly educated, I don't know that you're going to ask about what cybersecurity challenges might you run into while you're doing this robotic surgery on me, right? Instead, you might ask like, oh, how trained are you in doing the robotics? What are the success rates? Things like that. I don't think people are going to really think about that risk. And it is a risk that I think people need to think about. And most people nowadays are probably going to go say, hey, my doctor says I need this procedure, and type it into ChatGTP and say, what risks should I be worried about? So I'd be curious to know like what it would spit back out, if it would even bring up the cybersecurity risk or not.
Yeah, I do wonder if you're in a hospital and, any device is presented to you, how many patients do you think have ever asked for labeling information for cybersecurity
None.
about the product? I would
1%.
say maybe a fraction of a percent. It's, in my mind, mostly for the hospitals. The hospitals are the ones that should and do check these things very closely, but patients, not so much. I think about, nobody's really that aware of cybersecurity. Nobody's super conscious of it. Once in a while, it'll pop up in the news with the, oil pipelines or the casino attacks or whatever it may be. But nobody's thinking about it actively, especially not when they're thinking about their healthcare. They go, how good is my doctor? How good is this robot? What's the success rate? Things like you said. So I don't think it's really at the front of many people's minds, mostly just the hospital IT technicians.
If it's in the news like every single day, pretty much, why are people not thinking about it? Like if I'm to get an implantable and it has wireless capability, I would certainly, maybe just because I'm in cybersecurity, I would be concerned about somebody hacking into it.
And my guess is you're seeing that news more than most people. I mean, unfortunately, we're kind of in a world where, most people would rather look at the latest TikTok craze than what's in the news. And I get it. Like there's many times I want to bury my head in the sand and don't want to know what's going on in the world because it can be depressing. But I do think that is a real challenge. And so it's front of mind for you, but it's not for most people. And I think when it's not front of mind for you, it's something that you kind of ignore. It's kind of like that whole, like when I was pregnant with my son, everyone around me was pregnant, right? And now I don't even notice people that are pregnant, right? At all. I always think, I never see anybody that's pregnant, but it was probably the same ratio back in the day. It just seemed like everyone was doing what I was doing because it was top of mind. And so I feel like unless it's something that you're really actively watching for in the news, you're probably not seeing about it or hearing about it.
I think it's also a bit of the mindset of, oh, well, that wouldn't happen to me. That happens to the casinos. That happens to the banks. That doesn't happen to the hospitals, even though hospitals are one of, if not the largest target for cybersecurity attacks. So I think that's a big part of it. And another part that doesn't always get discussed is oftentimes healthcare is generally catered towards an aging population who are less conscious of these things for cybersecurity. They are not paying attention, even if it's talking about it in the news.
You said an aging population? Like the majority of people that go to the hospital are like older people is what you're saying?
Healthcare in general is catered towards an aging population. That's why you go to any of these conferences and you hear them pitching why you should invest in Japan or Korea or China or any of these countries. They're talking about the US's age growth. They're talking about everywhere's age growth. And you're going to lead into more health problems at that. And so a lot of the people who are most geared up for these services aren't aware of what the risks could be, since it's just not front of mind.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Well, and I think too, we're living longer than we ever have before. And the longer you live, the more health problems you're going to have. And everybody right now, the big fad in the industry is to talk about longevity, to talk about, how to make your life longer, how to extend life. And so, as we're living longer, of course, there's going to be more challenges. But you're right. I think the older we get, the further away from technology we start to get.
Yeah, we are relying on technology.
Yes, every single day. And that's the interesting thing. I mean, but when my dad passed away a few years ago, but before he passed, he had some forms of dementia and couldn't even use like an iPhone. Like he had a flip phone and we had to write down instructions for how to make a phone call for him to look at. So I do think once you start to have, cognitive challenges, when we talk about like, advanced aging, I think, there's even less people that are going to ask questions, and hopefully their family's advocating for them. But unfortunately, not everybody has family to advocate for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's an interesting topic. So Suzy, like when you consult with a innovator, given like we talked about cybersecurity a little bit, like what do you does cybersecurity like even like come on their radar, or like what is like, I know they're trying to get funding is like number one.
Yes.
And then like regulatory later, maybe cybersecurity at the end. Like what are some of the top concerns that you encounter?
Of all of the topics that people ask me about, cybersecurity is probably the last one. Like out of 100 questions, I might get one about it. So you're absolutely right. It's not top of mind for them. It's top of mind for them when they need to comply with something in order to get their product approved. So if they have to do something for FDA, if there's something that they have to do outside of that, it's not. And I worry about some of these tracking apps and things like that maybe aren't FDA regulated at all, that I'm just tracking my symptoms. But, even if you're not promoting that data is to be shared with your physician, people are taking that data and sharing it with a physician, and physicians are making decisions on that. So if I really wanted to harm somebody, what's to stop me from hacking into that app and changing the, whatever's in their tracker to change clinical decision support or to make decisions differently from their physician? That is something that could happen. So, I think it's one of those things that has to be top of mind. And that's why I like that you're doing this podcast and making people aware of it. And when I saw your talk at LSI this year, I was like, oh, wow, everybody needs to see this and everybody needs to hear this conversation, because it is something that I'm probably asked about the least.
Yeah. And ironically, with cybersecurity, nobody really cares about it unless there's a compliance driver, which there is now. The FDA and EU MDR and other organizations like mandate cybersecurity, but people still don't think about it to the very end. And the FDA, as an example, wants you to develop a product with security in mind from the beginning. So like waiting to the very end doesn't work anymore. So we're trying to raise that awareness. But I understand, like if I'm an innovator, cybersecurity like is the last thing I probably consider, like you said, Suzy, because I'm trying to get funding. I'm trying to like prove my market fit. I'm trying to like get investors. It's all these other things that are top of mind, and cybersecurity is like the last thing, but yet it might be the thing that roadblocks me from getting my device approved.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. I do think a lot of like in early development, people are thinking about HIPAA compliance, and maybe they're thinking about protecting data, but they're not thinking about all of the other things that could happen. And I think that's where the challenge kind of comes in, because it's really like, okay, I've got to be HIPAA compliant. I've got to protect my data. I've got to have enough cybersecurity that my data is protected. But what if there's other ways that they could get in and cause harm? And I think that's one of the challenges. And how do we get people to think about it earlier? I know for me, I'm trying to have this conversation with startups earlier and earlier. And I think the more I have conversations with people like you, and the more I see presentations like the one that I've seen before, it does make me more aware of it, so that I'm hopefully advising and mentoring people in a much better way. But you're absolutely right. Until they get to the point where the FDA says, I'm closing the door on this. And most people are more busy trying to figure out how to not have to go through FDA or how to be FDA exempt than let's just comply.
What do you think, Trevor? Are we getting better with the awareness?
Yeah. And I think the data privacy things are a really big thing that we have problems with all the time. I'll have conversations with people every week where they say, we're not handling any sensitive data, so why does this apply to us? I go, it's not just about the data. There's more than that can go wrong. What if your device is the starting point for a ransomware attack? What if you're using, some critical class 3 device, an infusion pump with a vulnerability where you can cause a patient to overdose? There's a lot more than just goes into the data. And when you're looking at the FDA's definition of who has to comply with the FD&C Act for cyber regulations, there's not a single mention of what type of device or what type of data. It looks at characteristics. Can you connect to the internet? Do you have software? Is that software potentially exposed to a cybersecurity threat? I think that last point is a little bit silly because it's pretty much impossible to have perfectly secure software. So kind of anything can have.
I think that number 3 is ridiculous. Yeah, it's a software and you have an interface. That's all you need. You need to get a cybersecurity. Otherwise, the last point of the FDA cyber device is ridiculous in my opinion.
I've never seen someone meet the first 2 points and be able to prove they don't meet the third point ever.
Exactly. So you're saying, Trevor, that we should not just consider software and a interface, but also the class of the device, because obviously a class 2 or class 3 are more risky.
100%. It's got to be a risk-based approach. We'll look at. We can't even just talk about the data. If you aren't handling PHI, PII, there is less risk. If your device is a smart blood pressure cuff and that gets hacked into, it's not connected to the internet, you can't use it for a starting point for ransomware or anything. If that smart blood pressure cuff gets hacked into and it gives you a wrong reading for your blood pressure and they can just verify it with an old analog one, what's really the risk there? So it's a sliding scale compared to if you have a pacemaker, an infusion pump, a surgical robot, something where the slightest misstep could kill a patient. And there's got to be zero tolerance for any risk. So it is a bit of a sliding scale. We're looking at what is the device doing? How is it doing it? Different things like that all have to go into consideration. So it's not a really one-size-fits-all assessment. And that's why when we're scoring risk, it's based on what can you do to the patient or their data, not based on what can you do to the technology, since that will be consistent, but the patient harm will not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think that's one of the things that for folks, anybody that's working on a class 2 or class 3 device really needs to be cognizant of how it could impact that patient, what kind of harm it could cause to the patient, and not just the data side of things. And I don't know that it's thought about enough early on, at least.
So as we were talking, I was thinking about a device. I go to a holistic clinic here in Phoenix area, and I once a month stand on this thing. It's like a scale. It's called InBody. There's an app on my phone that I can bring up my body fat, my BMI, all these measurements. It does my visceral fat, everything else. I guess technically that thing might be a class 1 device, but my physician at that clinic is making decisions on what to give me from a supplement perspective or hormone perspective based on the results of that device. So would that device need the same scrutiny as an implantable? I guess now that we're talking about this, is kind of, I don't even know what the device is. It's just a scale, right? But it's a smart scale. But decisions are made based on the results from that scale. And there's an app on my phone that tracks everything.
Well, when you say scrutiny, do you mean FDA scrutiny or other types of scrutiny? Because it really depends on the claims that the manufacturer's making around that scale. So if the claims are just giving you information to use personally, and you can share it with your doctor or not share it with your doctor, we're not claiming to be a clinical decision support tool, then maybe the scrutiny is much less. And so I think you're kind of getting into this little bit of this gray area where maybe things are being used as clinical decision support tools, but they're not marketed or branded that way. And so maybe they don't have to have the same level of FDA approval. Maybe they're FDA exempt because they aren't making those claims. So it's really how is a company positioning and marketing it that really kind of makes the FDA's decisions around how they're scrutinizing it. So it's hard because there is definitely a gray area there. I think anybody that's using an app or any type of device to track any of their health measurements are probably reporting that to their doctor and getting advice back on it. And the doctor's using that to make some clinical decisions. But there's plenty of things out there that are trackers or that are doing exactly what you're talking about that are not considered clinical decision support tools.
So if I'm a manufacturer, I would just say this is not a clinical decision support system.
Yeah, but if
to
it's
bypass like FDA and all the other requirements.
And I think that's what some people try to do. And I think that's where we have to be really careful. Because if you're taking that data and decisions are being made, then all of a sudden it is being used as a clinical decision support tool. But if you're not marketing that way, and if you're basically making that claim, like this is not to make decisions based on your health, I'm sure there's some kind of legal disclaimer verbiage that you could put on your product to ensure that you don't have to go through that FDA scrutiny. But even if you make, types of claims later on down the line, or somebody says something about it that works for your company, that's like, hey, this doctor made this great decision because of our product. Now you're starting to cross that line, right? So it's a challenging area right now. And I do think there's definitely a gray area here about what needs that extra level of scrutiny and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I didn't even think about that until this conversation, because like that in-body scan thing, my doctor's making decisions about what to prescribe me based on my body fat percentage and my weight and the other measurements in that device. So it's probably not a clinical decision support system or whatever the term you use.
It's probably not, but think about too, like even when you go to get like your labs done, right? There's mistakes with those. Right. And doctors make decisions based on those as well. So I think it's a challenge. I think it's something that we're all going to have to figure out how we deal with it. And I would hope that a doc would maybe be sort of verifying some of that information. I mean, if it's not a life or death type of situation, maybe you have a little bit more, maybe you get a little bit more testosterone hormone replacement than you need or something like that. If it's not going to kill you or send you over the edge or do anything destructive, maybe it's not as big of a deal, but it's like, where do you draw the line, right? Where does it kind of cross over into how much more scrutiny does even the physician need to make over these tools?
Yeah, and these tools are like the scale, I'm sure, is hackable, and the app is probably hackable. So, it's more cybersecurity risk that decisions are being based on that. Like you said, they may not be life or death. Like if my testosterone levels are off and I get more, it's not going to kill me, but it might cause my hair to fall out or something. Yeah. So it might feel like it's killing me.
Yeah, you might be miserable for a while. But yeah, no, I totally get it. And it's a challenge. And it's one of those things for me too, as I'm trying to advise startups, how I always advise them, at least talk to the FDA. I have so many, digital health startups or folks that are using technology that are coming to me and saying, oh, we're FDA exempt. And I'm like, well, okay, at least have a conversation with the FDA and know what claims you're going to make and what claims you might need to make in the future. Like the iteration of the device or app that you have now, you might not be making any type of claim, but you may want this to be integrated into the physician workflow later. And now all of a sudden it becomes a clinical decision support tool, and you're going to have to go back out later and get that FDA approval. So I think it's challenging. And then we have people that are coming from the tech side of the world and from other places that are not familiar with healthcare and how it works, haven't worked in healthcare ever before, and are trying to navigate this and figure it out. And I think that makes it harder as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're coming up on time here. So I typically ask for some last departing words of wisdom. So I'll throw it over to Trevor. He's usually a pretty wise person, and I'll throw it over to you, Suzy. Don't say the thing you always say, Trevor. You gotta say something new.
Know what your doctor is using and understand what your risks are. This isn't for the manufacturers. This is for the patients. Understand what is going on in that hospital. What are the doctors using? What are the doctors doing? And I think that this conversation has really brought to mind for me that I've never personally been in the hospital and said, hey, what's the deal with that device that you're using? They just use it and I go, okay, they know what they're doing. They're doctors. I've never thought about it. But now maybe next time I'm in the hospital for some reason or another, I might ask a couple more questions about that product.
Yep. I think that's great.
All right. What about you, Suzy? Last minute.
I'll kind of piggyback on what we were just talking about. I think if you're creating a device or if you're creating some type of app in healthcare, think really early on about what your claims are going to be and what the iterations of your products are going to be. And if nothing else, have a conversation with the FDA so that you know early what you're up against and what types of things you're going to have to do to comply. You've got to think about the patient and what could possibly happen to them down the road.
100%. And this whole conversation is kind of like, I'll piggyback on Trevor's, brought to top of mind for me, like even that scanner that, tests my weight and my body fat and stuff, like, what if that's compromised? What's the decision the doctor may make, even though it may not be a clinical decision support system, but they're still making decisions based on it. So I'm going to have a little more awareness of these devices and how they're being used in the future.
Smart.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Suzy, for being a guest. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope to see you on the next episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast.